We're learning the third Sicha of Parshas Bechukosei in Chelek Yud Zayin on page 332. This is a Sicha which will discuss the connection of the end of Chumash Vayikra to the beginning, and also the end and the beginning of the Parsha of this week, Bechukosei, and all based on what it says in Likutei Torah on this week's Parsha and what it says in Likutei Torah in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. There are some very fundamental points in Chassidus that are going to be discussed here in this Sicha. The shir today is being learned Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin and Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We already spoke about this many times. That there's a special connection zwischen der Aschale und dem Siyum für jeder Inyan in Torah. There's a special connection between the beginning and the end of every subject in Torah. Al derech wie steht in Sefer Yetzirah, this is similar to what it says in Sefer Yetzirah, not Seifan b'tchilasan or tchilasan b'seifan. That the end is wedged into the beginning and the beginning is wedged into the end. So there's a connection there. On al derech zeh in Torah shebiksav, the same is true as also in Chumash. The aschale v'siyum fin yede sefer, the beginning and the end of every sefer of the 5 Chumashim, on oich fin yede sedre, and the same is true with every sedre itself, haben zwischen sich hashayches v'kesher b'teichen. There's a relation and a connection in the content of the beginning and the end of the Chumash and the beginning and the end of the Parsha. So leitem beParshaseinu Bechukosei. So according to this, over here in this Parsha of Bechukosei, Vibalt, as the seeing from the Seder is them Seifon. So now the end of this Parsha is both the end of Sefer Vayikra of the whole. It's the end of the whole Sefer Vayikra. Unsai from Parshas Bechukosei, it's also the conclusion of this week's Parsha of Bechukosei, Darf Mezagen. So therefore we must say, as this is done, there's a certain point that unites them here, zwischen Aschalas Sefer Vayikra, in the beginning of the Chumash of Sefer Vayikra, Aschalas Parshas Bechukosei, the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, and Seif Parshas Bechukosei, and the end of Parshas Bechukosei. So what is that point that brings them together? Here we see a wondrous thing. Loit di aschalas von Sefer Vayikra on Parshas Bechukosei. If you look at what's explained in Likutei Torah regarding the beginning of Sefer Vayikra and the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, the Chassidische Parshas von die Wochen, the Rabbi would always refer to the Likutei Torah as the Chassidische Parsha of the week. It becomes very clear, both of these beginnings of Chumash Vayikra and Parshas Bechukosei, and they're explained there in Likutei Torah with the same idea. You can clearly see how it's connected to the end of the Parsha of Bechukosei in Imsim von unser Sedra, in the end of the Sedra of this week. As the Rabbi will soon we see clearly how this is connected. And dabei zetmen, and you can also see there in Likutei Torah them nods seifan b'tchilasan, the connection of the end and the beginning, not only the connection to the end of the Parsha of Bechukosei in the Chumash, also in what's explained in the end of the Sefer of Likutei Torah. Was wird herumgerät in die Drushim auf Aschala Sefer Vayikra on Aschalas Parshas Bechukosei, it's because this point that the Alter Rebbe explains in the Maimer that's in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra and in the Maimer which is in the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, the selbe Nekude is euch mevuer in dem Siyum von die Drushim of Parshas Bechukosei. It's the same point that he discusses in the last Maimer of Parshas Bechukosei. So we clearly see that there's a connection here between these Maimarim. And this is even more wondrous. In Torah Biksav is the Siyum from Parshas Bechukosei, euch the Siyum from Sefer Vayikra. So in Chumash, of course, Parshas Bechukosei is the end of the Sefer of Vayikra. Aber in Likutei Torah, sind da Hisafis nach die Drushim from Parshas Bechukosei. In Likutei Torah, there are other additions of Maimarim that were added after Parshas Bechukosei that are printed there. Now everything in Likutei Torah, as the Rabbi brings into Ha'aris, was printed and set up by the Tzemach Tzedek, and therefore it has a very particular diuk in the order of how everything was printed. Zetmen, so here as well you see, as Eichenim Siyim from the Hisafis, also in the conclusion of those Hisafis, which are additions to the Chumash before that it was Vayikra. Retzach wegen demselben in, now. It also speaks about the same theme that it speaks about in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, and at the end of Parshas Bechukosei. So what is this one theme that it speaks about? The shayches not seifam betchilasam. So the relation here, let's look first into the simple pshat of the psukim where we see the connection here. In Pashtus, zwischen Aschala Sefer Vayikra und sein Siyam. In the beginning of the Sefer Vayikra and at the end of Sefer Vayikra in the psukim, so the connection that you see is as follows. Sefer Vayikra, hauptsächlich mit den Dinim von Karbanis. It's the Sefer that begins all the halachas of Karbanis. As it begins, Adam ki yakriv mikem Karban Hashem gaimer. Und das Siyam von Sefer Vayikra redt wegen zwei Suge Karbanis. And so to the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra, even though there was a lot of different things that were spoken about in this Chumash in between, which were not all about Karbanis. But when it comes to the end of Sefer Vayikra, again, it speaks about two kinds of Karbanis. Aleph, Bechur, the carbon of a Bechur, the firstborn, that has to be brought as a carbon, and also Ma'aser Behema, the 10th of the herd of animals that has to be brought also as a carbon. Now since Dafke die zwei Karbanis während der Mond bis Sefer and Sefer Vayikra. Out of all types of Karbanis, it's these two that the Torah mentions here at the end of Sefer Vayikra. Darf man sagen, so we must say, as in Zei spiegelt sich ab, der Klolis Inyan Karbanis was retzach betchila Sefer Vayikra. In these two Karbanis is reflected the whole concept of Karbanis that's introduced and the way it's introduced in the beginning of the Sefer of Sefer Vayikra. Here and them. So the explanation for this is as follows. The chiluk zwischen Bechur und Ma'aser is. What is the difference between the carbon of Bechur and the carbon of a Ma'aser? Bechur is Kadosh Ma'atzmai. Bechur is the firstborn that's holy and sanctified to be a carbon on its own from birth. Milmaila from above, machtmanim, zokman as is a Kadosh. Hashem from above makes him or says that this is holy, not with any action that's required of a person from below to do. Sein Kedusha is nicht verbunden mit der Pulle von einem Adam. Mashein kein Kedushas Ma'aser. On the other hand, the sanctity of the Ma'aser of the Behemoth, the 10th, is Toloi in Avodas Adam. That depends on the person to be Mekadosh. Der Mensch darf zählen. You have to line up the animals inside the barn, and then they come out, and you count 1, 2, 3. And when it comes to the 10th, you hit him with a red paint, and then you designate him to be the 10th one, to be the one that becomes holy. That comes through the action of the person that makes it holy. That's the distinction between Bechur and Ma'aser. Nachmer is the snicker b'zman hazeh. The distinction between Bechur and Ma'aser is even more noticeable today. Was Kedushas Bechur is faran oichitzt. The Kedusha of a Bechur, which is from the time of birth, is even today. About that is Kadosh Ma'atzmai. He's Kadosh on his own, and that's something that there's no difference if the Beis HaMikdash is standing or not. Mashein ken Kedushas Ma'aser, which is not the case with the Kedusha of Ma'aser. Was is Lepoil Nita b'zman hazeh. In actuality, we don't do this today. Weil the Chacham haben Geise gewähnt, nicht abzuschäden ke Ma'aser Behema. Chacham decreed not to separate this Ma'aser Behema and not to come to misuse it as kotshim, which anyways can't be brought as a carbon. So practically speaking, today we don't have Ma'aser Behema. So now, based on this explanation here, the difference between what the carbon of Bechur is and what the carbon of Ma'aser is, Yumta Kaseder, it's very well understood, the order here of how this is brought. Was früher steht wegen Bechur. First the Torah tells us the halacha about the Bechur being a carbon, und danach wegen Ma'aser. And following this, it tells us about the Ma'aser Behema. In Avodas HaKarbanis, when it comes to Karbanis, which is Kiriv Lelakos, the concept of a carbon is coming close, bringing close to Hashem. Kommt früher da Amshachas HaKedusha Mulmaila Lamata, Bechur. The first step is to draw down holiness from above to below, which is what Bechur represents. That's the first step, when you get that assistance and that revelation from above. Und erst danach, and only following this, Ken Zayin, the Avodas Adam Lamata Lamayla. That empowers a person to elevate himself from below to above, which is what Ma'aser represents, an action that a person does to sanctify this animal and bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Mizbeach. So this is the end of the whole Sefer Vayikra. Das ist echt die Sheiches von dem Teichen. So now this is the connection of this content here that you have. B'siyum from Sefer Vayikra, at the end of the Sefer, mit zayin aschala, with the beginning where it speaks about Adam ki yakriv mikem carbon Hashem. A person brings a carbon for the Eibishter. So over here, if you take a look and look at the Torah, how he explains this pasuk of Adam ki yakriv mikem, you clearly see how what he explains is directly connected to the same point that's in the Chumash in the end of Sefer Vayikra. In Likutei Torah is mavur. So in the Kutei the Alter Rebbe explains, as Adam, ki yakriv mikem, carbon lashem. When it says here the term Adam, who is this referring to? Neintas was Adam ha'elya. This refers to the supernal Adam, to the Eibishter, that is mekarev, yakriv, dem Adam shalamata tzelokos. That Hashem is bringing close the person from below to him, to godliness. Mikem carbon v'gaima, to elevate the person to be close to Hashem. And he explains there, as frier vet nimshach as sarusa de leila. First, there is an awakening from above that arouses a person to come to mekara zayin dem Adam shalamata to bring a person closer to Hashem. Nachdem is the pasuk mamshech, and then after this, the pasuk continues and says, Mina beheme goyme takrives karbanchem, that from a beheme you should bring karbonis, which means was das retzach wegen dem carbon was dem Adam darf bringen by this atzmai. This is speaking about literally the person here below, what he has to bring as a carbon to bring himself close to Hashem. From their beheme shabai, and the term beheme that the pasuk speaks about here refers to the animal within a person that he has to transform and bring as a carbon for Hashem. Asarusa de l'sata. So this refers to the avodah that comes from below, following the power that Hashem gives a person from above. Das is behesim, so this fits perfectly. It's the exact same point to the tzvei suge karbonis, to the two kinds of karbonis, wegen velachas retzach b'soif sefer vayikra, of which it speaks in the end of sefer vayikra, b'chair, which is kadosh milmayla. It speaks about the b'chair, which is sanctified and holy from above, which is the Adam ki yakriv, the Adam elyon, and Meiser, which is Kadosh Ayidei Adam. And then the Meiser, which is the Kedusha that comes from below, when a person sanctifies the Meiser as the Meiser Behema. Here, so that's a very clear connection between the explanation of Likutei Torah in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra to what it speaks about in the Chumash in the end of Sefer Vayikra. Now, these 2 points over here. B'chair, the carbon of a B'chair, which is a Sarusa de Leila, which represents the arousal that comes from above, on Meiser, and then the carbon of Meiser, which is a Sarusa de L'Sata, representing the Aveda from below. Is that an Oich Faran in the Adam Gufa? Within a person's Aveda himself, there are 2 aspects of a person's Aveda that relate to B'chair and Meiser. What are these 2 aspects within the person himself? B'chair is Einer. There's only one B'chair. There's only one firstborn. If there are many animals born here, is there the Erster? He's the first one. So what this represents in a person is the level of his neshama, the level of chachma. It says, Kadesh li kol b'char, you sanctify the b'char, was Kadesh is b'chinas chachma. It says in many places in Chassidus that the term Kadesh, holiness, true holiness, is in the level of chachma. And we're talking about a very deep level of holiness in the neshama, which the Alter Rebbe in Tanya explains that this is the source of Mesiris Nefesh of a Yid, that comes from the Chachma Shebenefesh. That's the level of B'chair. Sorry. Meiser, what does Meiser represent? The 10th of the animals. So Dav Zayin Sen, to have the mitzvah to be able to be Makdish, or Makdish, this animal, to be a carbon, so you have to have 10. Aveda mitzad esa kayches hanefesh. So what this represents is the aveda a person does with all of the other kayches that he has from his neshama. The 10 kayches a person has, not just the highest and the deepest, which is the chachma, the source, and the mysterious nefesh of the yid. Unchayvas kol echad ve'echad. And what we learn out from the mitzvah of Meiser is, when you sanctify the 10th of the animals, that everybody is obligated, as al kolpanim di letzte, that at least the last of the 10 of these kayches a person has, which is hagilui, the lowest level in a person, which is expressed and revealed outward. Hashayach lamachshava dibura ma'aseh. So that's the lowest in the kayches of a person, usually the sphere of malchus, which is related to his thought, speech, and action, which are the different modes of expression or revelation in a person. Yiyah kaidesh, that at least this should be fully sanctified to Hashem. And the Rebbe adds, afilu by a beinani, which this is even true regarding a Beinani, Shehi Midas Kol Adam. Beinani is the level that's required of every person, as the Alter Rebbe says, to at least live like a Beinani, to be careful in his machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. So this is the difference here between the B'chair and the Meiser. B'chair represents the Kedusha of Chachmeh Shebenefesh, the Mesiris Nefesh of Yid, the deepest level of a Yid's Aveda. And Meiser represents all the 10 Kayches, and more specifically the 10th, which you have to sanctify, at least the Machshava Dibur Meiser. Now, the far, so therefore, is Aleph number 1, Bechor Kodesh Matzmai. This explains why the Bechor, we say that this is sanctified on its own. This is Nitoli and Avodas Adam. This is not dependent in a person's actions or what a person does. But B'chinas Chochmah Shebenefesh, this level of Chochmah in the person's Neshama, which is Koyach HaMesiris Nefesh, this is the source of the Mesiris Nefesh of a Yid, is da by Yedin Yidin B'Yerushim Aviseinu. This exists there within the heart of every single Yid. It's an inheritance of our ancestors from Avraham Avinu and so on, and therefore this is something that's there. Me'atzmai. Bei is another point. Kedusha's Bechor is Oichdon Zman HaGolus. The Kedusha of Bechor is even here in the time of Golus, as the Rabbi mentioned before, that a Bechor born in the time of Golus has the same Kedusha of a Bechor as it was in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Varum? B'chinas Chochmah Hanal Shebenefesh. This level of Chochmah in the Neshama of a Yid is Alle Molgans. It's always pure, it's always intact, it never gets affected from what a person does. Which is not the case when it comes to the sanctity of Meiser, which is Esa Koiches HaNefesh. Meiser refers to the Avodah that a person does with all of the faculties that he has. Asiri, and specifically with the 10th of the Koiches, which is the Machshava related to Machshava Dibur Meiser, is Talui in Avodas Adam. This is something which depends on the work, on what a person does. And was the Ribber is done them shinuyim, and therefore for this there are differences between Zman HaBayis, the way it is in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, which then you did practically go and do this mitzvah to be makdish to Meiser and to bring it as a carbon. When it says Meir Elokus Begilui, that's a time period when godliness is shining and more revealed, and therefore a person has the power to express and bring this kedusha into all of his kaiches. On Zman HaGolus, unlike the time of the Beis HaMikdash, in the time of Golus, a Yid does not have that same koyach to reveal godliness in all of his koyches. The situation of Golus is a result of the Avedas, and therefore Yidden don't have the same power of revelation. So this is the connection that we see here clearly between, we have the connection of the beginning of Chumash Vayikra to the end of Chumash Vayikra. But now the Rebbe will bring this into the connection to the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei as well. Based on what we just explained over here, the difference between Bechor and Meiser in the Avodah of a Yid, that it refers, Bechor refers to the Chochmah, to the Mesiris Nefesh, and Meiser refers to the Avodah of all the Kaiches, all the 10 Kaiches, so we can see a open connection there to what it says in the Likutei Torah in the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei. Und das ist euch the Kishur zwischen Seif Parshas Bechukosei mit Haschalasa. So this is the connection also to the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei. Oifim Bechukosei telechu, ves mitzvosei tishmeru, is muvur and Likutei Torah. So the Alter Rebbe explains what's the difference between these two things the pasuk speaks about here. Bechukosei telechu meant the avodah von hiluch. This refers to the avodah of a person that's walking and going bli gvul. He's going without any limitation. That's the concept of hiluch, walking out of the space that he's in without limitation. Mitzad b'chinas chakika shebeneshama. And this is based on the level of chakika shebeneshama, meaning something that's engraved very deeply in the essence of the neshama. Bechukosei, besides meaning the laws or the statutes, it also means from lashon chakika, that it's engraved very deeply in the soul. That is sheidish haneshama v'yiz chakuka lamayla. This is the source of the neshama, as it is engraved in its source above. That's the level of halicha. When a neshama has the power to do things unlimited, it's because of the sheidish of the neshama where it is above. But now, however, since as der hiluch nemtzich mitzat sheidish neshama, this power to be able to go with such great strength, of unlimited, comes from the source of the neshama above. Und der Mensch gefindt sich lemata in a guf kashmi. But the neshama is here in the body, in the world here below in a physical body. Ken der hiluch nit haben ken kiyum. So this level of going to such a degree will not last. The Alter Rebbe's expression in the Maimon there is leisamid v'leisakim. It will not stand, it will not last. Seiden unless as der adam lamata zol durch sein aveda werden akeli ditzu. The person below with his guf, with his physical body, has to be a vessel to contain and to receive this. Das is ves mitzvosei tishmeru, and that's what the second half of the pasuk is teaching me, how a person becomes a vessel to contain this. Durch Avodas HaMitzvahs dolamata. When a Yid fulfills mitzvahs here below in this world, mach der Adam die Kelim v'zenen tishmeru. So with this, he creates the vessels, with the physical mitzvahs that he does with his physical body, he creates the vessels tishmeru, which are shemer umekayim dem hiluch blikvul. They will sustain and keep this level of going with this unlimited level of serving Hashem, that it should continuously be so and be sustained. Was kommt mitzat sheirish haneshama, which a person has from the sheirish of his neshama, as das soll sein an neufen von tikun la'ad, that this koyach that he has to continue to serve the Eibusher should last and go on forever. So that's the two parts of the pasuk. The first part speaking about the power of Bechukosei telecha coming from the source of the neshama above. Second part of the pasuk, speaking about practically what a person does over here below with his guf in order to sustain that in his aveda. So on die zwei inyanim, so we clearly here see the connection. These 2 points, Aleph, Bechukosei telechu mitzad sheirish haneshama. The first part of the pasuk, Bechukosei telechu, speaking about the source of the neshama. On Beis mitzvosei tishmeru mitzad dem adam lamata. And then when it says that you keep the mitzvahs, which is the aveda a person has to do here below. So zenen al derech die zwei inyanim shebesiyum ha-parsha. This is compared to the 2 points that are mentioned in the end of the parsha, which we spoke about before. Aleph, Bechor, when it speaks about Bechor, Chachma shebenefesh, the Bechor which is the Chachma shebenefesh, that's the source of the neshama. And Beis, Meiser, and then when it speaks about Meiser, which is the Asa Koiches HaNefesh, referring to the 10 faculties of the soul, which is the Avodah that a person does here below in this world. That's the connection that we see to the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei. So we have the connection here from the beginning of Chumash Vayikra to the end of Chumash Vayikra, which is the end of Parshas Bechukosei, and also to the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, based on what it says in Likutei Torah. But now the Rebbe continues and takes this to a much deeper level, focusing here on the end of the parsha that will show us a deeper point about the whole union of Karbanis B'chlal. There is the following rule. We always follow the conclusion. That the conclusion is a real indicator regarding the whole subject. Und wie bald as the siyum v'chosim from Sefer Vayikra is mit Meiser Dafke. So since the whole conclusion of Sefer Vayikra is specifically with the carbon of Meiser Behema. Darf man sagen, if so we must say, as das was Meiser kommt nach Bechor, that since Meiser is the last of what's mentioned in the Chumash coming after Bechor, is nit nar. So the reason is, this is not only, Valazoi is the Seder on Yonim, Kanal Sif Beis. It's not only because this is the order of the way it is in a person's Aveda, that first comes Bechor, which is the revelation from above, and then comes the Meiser, which it empowers a person to be able to do his Aveda from below. As früher kommt die Sarusa de Leila Bechor und danach Avedas Adam Meiser. Now rather, it's even more than this. Oich, in addition to this, weil es ist da a Meile in der Kedusha was kommt durch Aveda, there's a great advantage to the holiness that comes through a person's Aveda, legabe the Kedusha was kommt mal Meila. More than the Kedusha that a person receives from above. Und der Fahr is der Siyum v'chosim from Sefer Vayikra mit Meiser. So therefore the conclusion of the whole Sefer Vayikra, which is speaking about Karbanis, is with Meiser, with the carbon of Meiser, weil der Tachlis von Inyan our Karbanis is, because the whole purpose of all Karbanis is Avedas Adam. Specifically, the work, the Aveda that a person does from below, which is in Meiser Dafke. On the phone is Eich move on, and from this we also understand Benegedem Seder and Aschal Sefer Vayikra on Parshas Bechukosei. The same is also true regarding the beginning of Sefer Vayikra and the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei. Das was es Arusa de Lasata, Takrivu es Karban Chem. This that it says in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra about the Aveda from below, bringing your carbon. Kommt nach der Arusa de Leila Adam ki Yakriv Gaime. This follows after the Sarusa de Le'ela, which is the Adam ki Yakriv, the reason is, nit nor weil die es eures was kommt nor mitzad an Sarusa de Le'ela hat nit ken kiyum. The reason is, not only because the order is that first there has to be an Sarusa de Le'ela, an awakening from above, but if it comes just from above, it will not last. Ubema'ad zman yichle koyach his eures azais. And over a short period of time, that arousal from above could dissipate altogether. This is the Lashon Dal Tereb and Likutei Torah. Und and therefore so now it's necessary for a person to connect himself from below. So now he can become a vessel to contain this awakening that came from above. Or and now this arousal, this awakening from above will last forever and it'll be continue. So that's the simple pshat of the order of why it first speaks about the Adam from above, and then the hakrava, the takrivu that comes from below. But it's actually more than this. Not oich, even more. Das is a seder from Mailim Bakaidish. The pasuk is going from level to level, higher and higher. Es es faranan ilui in asarusa de lesato aveda sa Adam legabe der was kommt mitzad asarusa de leila. There's a great advantage to the aveda that comes from a person below more than the arousal and the awakening that comes from above. So it's not just that the person is doing his aveda in order to continue that arousal from above, that it shouldn't disappear. But the actual aveda from below in itself has a tremendous smiler more than the awakening from above. Is same is also true regarding the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, where the pasuk adds mitzvahs tishmeru, to keep the mitzvahs in the physical body here in this world. Nitnar. So this, that a person keeps mitzvahs, is not only a shmira v'keli. It's not just to keep and to create a vessel to contain some inyan von Bechukosei telechu, to contain the aveda of Bechukosei telechu that comes from the source of the neshama above. Not in dem gufe, in this itself, in the mitzvahs tishmeru itself, is da an aliyah b'kodesh. This is going a level higher, legabe the aliyahs from Bechukosei telechu, a level even higher than the Bechukosei telechu, which is only from above. So what's this concept here? Darf man verstehen, but the question is, bald Bechukosei telechu is bechinas chakike. If Bechukosei telechu represents that level of the neshama which is engraved in its source above, biz the hechste darge chakike, and this is the highest darge, the highest level that there is, a neshama being engraved in its source. Oisius shebe'etzem hanefesh. The Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah speaks about those letters that are engraved in the very essence of the soul. Oisius hamuyuchodais ba'atzmus erin seif. Letters that are engraved in the very essence of Hashem himself. This is Mavor in Likutei Torah, as the Alter Rebbe explains. On bechinas halicha, speaks about chakike, and it also speaks about a level of halicha which is unlimited, a person that's going in an unlimited fashion. Is in was besteht der Yisrain from mitzvahs tishmeru? What advantage is there to the simple performance of mitzvahs physically with a body here in this world that doesn't at all reach to the concept of hakike, the level of the neshama, on the level of hakike and the level of halicha of the neshama above? So the explanation for this is as follows. In the minyan anal, regarding this point, as the yisoiris was kumt durch esarusa de leila, that when you have an arousal that comes from above, is nit kein dover amiskayim. So the Alter Rebbe says this is not something that will last. Sideness is denach da an esarusa de lesata, unless you will also have the person from below working and connecting to this arousal. Is l'chayrin it move on. So you can ask the following question: why is that so? Why can't the awakening and the power that Hashem gives a yid from above last without a person doing anything? Says Yedua, so now it's known as the Asarusa de Leila was kumt mitzadatzma. This awakening that comes from above, that it comes on its own without a person generating this at all. Nemtzich von Azam Adrege, the source of this, it comes from such a level was vumaisa tachtenim kenet erlangen. The actions of a person below cannot even reach there at all and can't even trigger this at all. Und der Rebbe wird sie nimshach not an anayfim von chafetz chesed, and therefore this comes down from Hashem's initiative that Hashem desires kindness, and therefore He desires to give this power to a person here below. That's where it comes from. A person doesn't reach there at all. Im kein if so, stellt sich the shaila, the following question comes: Zu libvas muzmen danach haben die esarusa de lesata. Why is it then necessary that in order to perpetuate this awakening that came from above, that you have to have an awakening from below, that it should continue? Seemingly, kishein wie es darf nicht sein, früher kann es esarusa de lesata oder zum mamshich sein, die esarusa de leila. If when it comes to actually drawing down, triggering this awakening, this arousal from above, so that comes from Hashem's initiative. Azoi hat euch denach nit gedacht sein nötig. So too it should not be necessary to have an asarusa de lasata, an aveda, an awakening from below, auf zu aufhalten, to contain and to hold the Yisayridus was kommt von der asarusa de lasata, to hold this Yisayridus that comes from above and to keep it, that it should remain with the person. It shouldn't be necessary to keep it there. If Hashem is providing the person with this power from his own initiative and a person can't even reach to that level at all, so it should remain. It's unlimited, and Hashem is giving it from His kindness. It should remain there with the person without him doing anything for this. Und es ist nicht scheich zu sagen, and seemingly, you can't answer and say, as das ist, zu lieben chesaren in the matzav Adam, that there's something here which is lacking in the condition of the person, and therefore it will not last in him. Varom, so you can't say that. Since the Amshache is doch kanal, since we're saying that this that's being drawn down from above in an Asarusa de Le'ela, it comes from Azam Adrege, it comes from a level where Hashem doesn't consider at all the condition of the person, whether he's worthy of this, not worthy of this. It's Hashem's kindness. This is purely Hashem's kindness that's being drawn down to the person. If so, if the initial revelation of this Asarusa D'Leila comes without looking if the person is worthy of this or not, so then once it comes down, it should remain and it should be there with the person, and whether the person is a keli for it or not, it shouldn't matter. It should remain with the person without him doing anything, any Asarusa D'Lasata. Pashto, so simply, what's the answer for this? Is the time, the reason is, we are zok dort in Lekutei Torah. So the Alter Rebbe explains there in Lekutei Torah and says, as we bald the Espailus Adam, Isarusa de Lasata, since when the person gets affected and excited by this revelation that came from above, is gekommen blois mitzad der Isarusa de Leila, since it's all a result of this awakening that came from above, nit der Adam is nishtane geworden, but the person did not permanently change, is beistalik ha'ara al yainu, when this great revelation gets removed. And the reason is, she'eina me'ira rak be'eis ratzon. This revelation from above only shines and comes to a person in an auspicious time. It's not always there. Hashem shines and opens up this revelation from His initiative in the special times, and then it's removed. So so then, once it's removed, so now the love that a person experienced as a result of this revelation becomes totally annulled, because the person didn't in essence change. So the point is that this revelation that comes from above is only in a eis ratzon. It doesn't come and remain constantly. And therefore, once it's removed, so the person remains who he is. So that explains very simply why it's necessary to have then an asarusa de l'sata, that the person should actually change himself to be able to continue that level of love that he had when at the time when this revelation from above was there, in the time of an eis ratzon. That's a simple explanation. However, the Rebbe here is going to give us a much deeper understanding and a much deeper explanation for why this is. This will be much better understood al piyam mavur and Lekutei Torah in Soif Parsha Seinu, based on what it says in Lekutei Torah in the end of this week's Parsha. Oifin Maimer Azal, and what it says in Pirkei Yavis, da me'ayim basa ulana tahilach, that a person should know from where he comes, that he comes me'ayim basa ulana tahilach, and where he's heading to. So the Alter Rebbe there explains the difference between ayin and on. On, vaistef mokim gashmi. On, the place where a person's heading to, refers to the physical world, physical space in this world. On ayin, the level of ayin, where the neshama comes from, oif bechinas chachma. That refers to the level of chachma, where the neshama comes from, versus hecher from mokim, which is higher than any concept of any level of any space. So ma'ayin basa meint dem sheirish ha-neshama was nemt sich mit b'chinas ayin. So this is the source of the neshama that comes from this level of ayin. Where a person is ultimately heading to refers to the reward of the neshama in the time of Tchias HaMesim. And that will be specifically, of course, here in Olam Hazeh, Mokim Gashmi, in this physical world, on. That's what the Mishnah is saying here. Is doch tamua. So the question over here is about this concept, that the neshama comes from a place of chachma, from a very high place of ayin. and it comes down ultimately to receive its reward. Where? Here in this physical world at the time of Tchias HaMesim. So the question is, Yiridas HaNeshama is doch Tzorech Aliyah. The whole purpose of why Neshama descends into this world is that through what it does in this world, it experiences a tremendous elevation to a higher level. If so, hein tvi is shayach, so how is it possible to say, as noch the Yeride from Bechinas Ayin, Sheirish HaNeshama, that after the Neshama descends from its level of Ayin, where it is in its source, and it does its Aveda here in this world, soll the Schar, the Aliyah from the Neshama Zayin. So now what's the reward? What's this level that the Neshama gets elevated to? So it is in the Bechina von On, that it comes to the level of On, which is B'chinas Makim, which is a space here in this world, Nidereker von Ayin, much lower than the level of Ayin, where the Neshama comes from. How could the Neshama be rewarded by experiencing a tremendous Yeride that it has to now be rewarded here in this world? So it's answered over there in Lekutei Torah. As dafke in On. It's specifically over here in the level, in the place called On, which is Makim Gashmi in this physical world. Is da de Meile von Dira b'Tachtonim. Here you have the tremendous advantage of the fact that it's this place that we create a dwelling for Hashem in the world below. Dafke dole mata, it's specifically here below, is Faran der Gili Eirein Seif. You have the ultimate revelation of Hashem's infinite light, the Kamei, Ruchnius, V'Gashmius Shavin. Because for Hashem himself, Ruchnius and Gashmius are all equal and the same. So the fact that it's in this physical world means that this is a greater level of revelation that could be not only in the level of Ayin, in the source above in Ruchnius, but even here in the physical world. Was is Hechem from Bechinas Ayin, and therefore this is even higher than the level of Ayin. So this haze, what this means is, Dafke in Avedas Adam, it's specifically in the Aveda of a person in this world, Fir Tzachais de Kavana von Atzmos. This is fulfilling the purpose of creation, the purpose of why the Hashem himself, the very essence of Hashem, of why he wanted the world to be created. Hecher be'ein aroich von ayin de chachma. So therefore this is connecting to the essence of Hashem, which is infinitely greater than the level of ayin of chachma. Was nesave HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyis le'yizbarach dire b'tachtainu. Hashem desires to have a dwelling specifically here in this world below. Ve'afitois in Maimer. The conclusion of the Maimer on Lekutei Torah is V'hainu b'chinas atika kadisha chulu. That this is the level of atika kadisha. What's atika kadisha? Was atik is their tainug de l'mayla. Atik refers to the pleasure of Hashem, which is connected to the nisava, Hashem's desire in creation. Und der Iber is the schar aveda from machen adire b'tachtonim. So therefore, since this is the main aveda of a person, and this is the main advantage of a aveda of a yid here below, so too regarding the reward of a yid's aveda from machen adire b'tachtonim, when you make this world a dwelling for Hashem, oich in bechinas on makim gashmi. The reward of the neshama is specifically here in the physical space in this world. Val dischar is b'makim aveda ki yidua. Because it's known that the schar of a yid is here in the place of Aveda as it's known. So that's the experience, the aliyah that the neshama experiences when it comes down into Tchias HaMesim in the schar in this world. And thus is the hezber. This also explained was the Aveda Sa'adam Lamata tut oif oich in the inyanim was kumen mitzad chafetz chesedu. This explains why it is that even after there's an asarusa de leila that comes from Hashem's kindness to provide a person from his initiative and arousal and awakening from above. But nevertheless, now you need the Aveda of a person, asarusa de lesata, to sustain that. And there's a great advantage that dafka the Aveda of a person below could sustain this. And the reason is as follows. Alam shachas mol maila, all revelations that come from above, zenen fun oireis v'giluyim. These are lights, these are levels of revelation, levels of expression from Hashem's essence. Any level of revelation, there could be changes. They're prone to being changed. It's not something which is constant and permanent. In Avedas Ha'adam, however, when a Yid does his work from below and serves Hashem, this is an expression of the fulfillment of the desire and the purpose of the essence of Hashem in creation. And this purpose, when a person serves Hashem below, is this is even higher than the awakening, the arousal that comes from above, which is chafetz chesed, which is Hashem's revelation of His kindness. And because the Avodah that a person does from below, this comes from the essence of Hashem, hechem from shinuyim, higher than any changes, tutzachayev der kiyom in the sarusa de la'ila. So therefore, this brings about this fulfillment, and that not the fulfillment, but rather the kiyum, that the sarusa de la'ila that comes to a person should last and should be permanent. The permanence, true permanence, without any change, is only by the very essence of Hashem Himself. And that is brought about specifically through the Avodah of a person, which is fulfilling the purpose of what Hashem Himself wanted in creation. So this is a completely new explanation to the advantage that there is to a person's Avodah below. The mit is eich musber, so this also explains was in Lekutei Torah dort. That why there in Lekutei Torah and onep from Sefer Vayikra, in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, is mamshech. The Alter Rebbe continues and says, nachdem wie sagt, after he says there, as dafke, durch hasarusa de lesate yeh dover amiskayim, that only when you have an Avodah from below, then what he does will last. As durch Avodas Adam, the langtmen in bechinas kiloi Adam hu. When a person serves Hashem and connects from below, he reaches to a level of loy Adam, higher than the level of Adam. The revelation from above is Adam ki Yaakov, but when it comes from below, then it's reaching to a place which is higher than any levels or features or details that exist in the form of an Adam. Vayel, so that the connection here is, das is der pnimi is the getam, this is the deeper and real reason, favas, esarusa de lesata, to teifakim and esarusa de leila. How it is that an esarusa de lesata of a person can actually bring about the lasting effect of the esarusa de leila, because it's specifically the avodah of a person that's fulfilling the kavanah of Hashem Himself, of Atzmos, and therefore he connects to Eloi Adamu, to Hashem Himself. Now, Kishem, Visis Lamaila, now just like above, as there tainuk von Atzmus, Nisave, is an Avodah Dafke. The ultimate purpose and the desire of Hashem is in the Avodah of a person here below. Azai says, Baim Adam Lamata. We see this also reflected in the nature of a person here below. Adam Reitze Bekav Shaloi Dafke. The nature of a person is he wants a measure of a kav that's his, even more than Tisha Kav Shachavera, 9 times as much if it's not his, if it belongs to his friend. Which means, Zain Ratzon V'tainug, a person's will and desire and pleasure is in dem was erat, oiske haravet durch Avodah v'yegiyah, something that he worked hard on, he invested effort into this, and he earned it with his own work, with his own toiling. This is something that a person cherishes and loves much more. So applying this back to Avodas Hashem, those things that a person receives as a gift from above with Hashem's kindness, without working on this. This does not express the real purpose of the creation, the kavanah of Atzmus, that the world itself below should be elevated. And this is the reason why even the person below will not feel the ultimate pleasure and to cherish this revelation from above, because this is not of the real fulfillment of Hashem's kavanah in creation. Dafke bekav shaloi, specifically when it's your measure, it's what the person does. Das was bekommt durch Avodah, what he receives through his own Avodah, is Adam Reitze. Here's where the person's desire is. Was Reitze da meint euch pnimius haratzen. The term Reitze in this context means the deeper desire of a person. Tainuk shebenefesh. This is where you have the real tainuk of a person. So the reason why it is this way is all a reflection of the real kavanah of Hashem in creation. Dafkin, the Avodah of a Yid, from below is where you have the fulfillment of the Nisava of Hashem, the Kavanah of Atzmos, and therefore Dafkin here, a Yid will feel the real satisfaction and the real tainug in his Avodah. This is now the connection also of the beginning and the end, and specifically with the end, to the end of the additional Maimorim that Alter Rebbe that is printed in Lekutei Torah after Chumash Vayikra. There's over there the end that speaks about this subject of Tainuk. Dort is Mavur. So there, the Alter Rebbe explains, as Yom Kippurim, Shabbos Shabbosain, is der Tainug Atzmi, that on Yom Kippur, this is the deepest level of pleasure, was is nit murkiv von kein ander inyan. It's not made up of any other thing that causes this pleasure. It's not comprised of anything. Usually pleasure is caused or could be caused by something which is external, or it's a combination of things, but here this is the essence of pleasure. the source of pleasure, the essence of the neshama, which is one with Hashem, that does not need anything external to bring about this pleasure. Und der Ribber is Yom Kippurim also b'achil l'shtir. And therefore, in Yom Kippur, it's forbidden to eat or drink because it's the essence of the neshama, which is connecting to the essence of Hashem. Then he explains there, Kum ter Chaga Sukkos and Shmini Atzeres. Following this comes Sukkos and Shmini Atzeres. Was demalt, so then, Vert der Tainug Nimshach in Makifim. So then, the Tainug that is there on Yom Kippur is drawn down in a level of Makifim. Makifim is encompassing, all-encompassing, which encompasses a person like the Sukkah, which surrounds a person. Und danach, it gets drawn down even further to penetrate a person, to come inside the person to affect them internally. In Pnimiyim, which is Lies Bechinas Da Eselekei Avicha Vavdei Belev Shalom V'Nefesh Chafetza Cholo, that a person can know his Father Hashem and to serve Him with a full heart, and V'Nefesh Chafetza. The Alter Rebbe concludes with Nefesh Chafetza, with the desire of the soul. Was Chafetza, the term Chafetza the Alter Rebbe uses here, meint doch Pnimiyus Haratzen. The term Chafetza refers to the deepest will of the person, or actually the tainug, the pleasure which is the source of the ratzon, of the will, of the willpower of a person. So this is what the Alter Rebbe explains. It comes from Yom Kippur down into Sukkos, into the makif of the Sukkah, and then it ultimately penetrates the person and affects him internally in a very deep level, and then this reveals the tainug, the pleasure of a Yid's connection to Hashem. It's these last words, nefesh chafetza, the desire of the soul of a Yid that's connected to Hashem, endigt sich der drush b'lekutei Torah. This is the conclusion of this Maimer lekutei Torah. Al derech wie das Siyum von den letzten drushim Parshas Bechukosei. This is very similar to the conclusion of the last Maimer in the end of Bechukosei Kanal, where there he says, v'hainu b'chinas atika kadisha cholu. Finishes off with the word speaking about Atika Kadisha. Was Atik is Atzmus HaTainug. Atik refers to the essence of the Tainug, of the pleasure of Hashem. So here as well, he refers to the essence of the Tainug, of the Neshama connecting to Hashem. So here, speaking about the Tainug of a Yid that comes out specifically in Shmini Atzeres, the Rebbe explains as follows. It says, Doch Yidua, so it's known as Shmini Atzeres is der Shemen. Shmini Atzeres also has another meaning. It means the oil, which is on the essentia. This is the lashon that it says in a Maimer in the name of the Alter Rebbe, essentia, the essence. Von ganzen Chodesh Tishrei. This is the essence. Shmini Atzeres represents the essence of the entire month of Tishrei. So therefore we have to say, as the nefesh chafetza from Sukkot Shmini Atzeres, that this level of nefesh chafetza, the desire of the person that he has in his Aveda, when it affects him internally, that you have in Sukkot and specifically in Shmini Atzeres, is hecher from der tainug habilti murkev from Yom Kippurim. So this is actually even higher than the tainug, the pleasure that the neshama has, even on Yom Kippur. Right, so that's why we say that this is the essence. This is the highest and the deepest connection that's expressed specifically on Shmini Atzeres. Isn't it move on, but it's not understood. How could you say this? Wie kann der Tainug von Sukkot to Shmini Atzeres? How could it be that the pleasure that there is on Sukkot and on Shmini Atzeres, when a person is eating and drinking physically, sein Hecher, wie der Tainug von Yom Kippurim, this should be even greater and higher than the pleasure that there is on Yom Kippur. Was demelt is man ausgetan von achille shtia. The pleasure of the soul that's revealed in Yom Kippur is seemingly much greater when the essence of the neshama connects to the essence of Hashem, removed and beyond any other interaction in the world, physically eating and drinking, and yet the eating and drinking and the pleasure that there is in the Aveda of a Yid on Shmini Atzeres is the essence and is even greater. How could that be? Not yes, but in them is kanal. So here again we see the same theme and the same point that was mentioned before. Adarab, it's on the contrary. While in Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, it's specifically here on Sukkot and on Shmini Atzeres, is the Aveda in the Bechine von On. A person here is serving Hashem on the level of On, which refers to the space in this physical world. He's eating, he's drinking physically. Dafke the far, it's specifically for this reason is demel da der Tainug von Atzmus Lamaila. Here you have the pleasure of the essence of Hashem, ubemeila euch von Etzem HaNefesh Mamish, and therefore this actually reveals an even deeper connection of the pleasure of the neshama connected to Hashem, because this is the fulfillment of Hashem's purpose in creation, the nisava, the pleasure of Hashem, and it's specifically this kind of aveda of eating and drinking in the enjoyment of the mitzvah of Shmini Atzeres and the Yontif that expresses the deepest connection of the neshama of a Yid to Hashem. But however, you may still ask, Vibalt, as the Tainuk for Yom Kippurim, is there Tainuk habilti morkiv? But the Alter Rebbe does say that the pleasure of Yom Kippur of the soul is that deepest pleasure which is not comprised of anything outside of the essence of the soul itself. In was besteht nachdem der Oiftu und Hechigkeit in dem Tainuk v'nefesh chafetza von Sukkos Shmini Atzeres. So still the question is, so what is this deeper level of pleasure that you can have on Sukkos and Shmini Atzeres, where the Alter Rebbe uses the term nefesh chafetza, that's even more than this pure pleasure that there is on Yom Kippur? Is there beer in them? So here the answer to this we can see in Likutei Torah in the beginning of this week's parsha. Al derech v'seretzach in Likutei Torah and onev von unser parsha. So in the beginning of Parshas Bechukosei, the Alter Rebbe explains as the oisiyas hachakike, letters that are engraved in a stone, which are one with the stone. Hagam, so this is an analogy for the neshama that's engraved on a very high level. Hagam is an nit kein doven neisaf of an even toiv. The advantage that you see in this analogy of engraving letters is that the letters are not an added feature to the stone. It's not like ink that's added to a paper. It's letters that are engraved and part of the stone itself. And that is the analogy for the neshama that's engraved in such a high place above. Von deswegen, nevertheless, kommen sie nicht zu der Pschittes von dem Even Toiv allein. This does not come to the stone itself before there's any engraving at all. Was is mufshit mikol tzura mamish. The stone itself, before there's any engraving, so it's removed of any shape, of any letter whatsoever. It's just the simplicity of the source of the stone itself, the analogy for the source of Hashem himself, before there's any engraving whatsoever. That's actually even higher. Al derech zeh as is binyanenu. So too over here, this is the distinction between the pleasure of the soul on Yom Kippur and the pleasure of nefesh chafetza that is on Shmini Atzeres. The tainuk for Yom Kippur, the pleasure that there is on Yom Kippur is a tainuk built in morkiv. That's a tainuk, yes, which is completely not affiliated with anything outside of the essence of the soul itself. But what this is compared to is bedugmet zu oisiyas hachakike shebenefesh v'zenen minei ubei, like letters that are engraved in a stone that are part of the stone itself. It's not an additional thing that's being placed on a piece of paper, like ink on a piece of paper. So too we're talking about a neshama, that its connection to Hashem is so powerful that it's like one, like the letters are one on the stone itself. The nefesh, chafetza, from Chag HaSukkos to Shmini Atzeres, however, when it comes to the level of the pleasure that's revealed on Sukkos and even more so on Shmini Atzeres, is aber wie die Pschittes von dem Even Toiv allein. This is the revelation of the source itself. In the analogy, the stone itself, which is simple and beautiful without anything being engraved in it. Der Tainug Atzmi von Etzem HaNefesh Mamish. This is the ultimate and deepest pleasure from the essence of the soul, which is one with Hashem, before there's any engraving whatsoever. That's an actually deeper connection that comes out specifically in the Aveda, in this physical world, by eating and drinking, which is the theme that we see both in Likutei Torah over here, in the Haisafis, and the end of the Haisafis of Likutei Torah, and the theme that we see that Alter Rebbe speaks about in the end of Likutei Torah, in the end of this week's Parsha, when he speaks about the advantage of on the Mokim Gashmi, the Aveda of a person, Dafki here below, as was explained before. Das ist euch, was der Inyan von was mit zwei Seid Tishmeru kommt nach Bechukosei Telecho. This is also the explanation why Ves mit zwei Seid Tishmeru follows after Bechukosei Telecho in the pasuk over here, and why this is actually an even higher level and a greater advantage than Bechukosei Telecho. Bechukosei is Bechinas Chakike. Bechukosei represents the level of Chakike when a person is engraved, the source of his neshama, which is engraved above. Takenit came davan noisef. It's not an additional feature of letters that are added to the stone. However, this is not yet the very source itself before there's any shape of letters whatsoever. So therefore, this level of going on a very high level, unlimited, that comes from this level of engraving here. Even though this is a level that the neshama is able to go even greater than malachim, it still has somewhat of a limitation to it. However, when the pasuk continues and says mitzvah tishmeru, when a yid fulfills mitzvahs physically in this world, bechinas on, this is the level which the Alter Rebbe speaks about in the Likutei Torah in the end of the parsha, the level of on in this physical world. Das nimmt die atzmus hapshitus. This actually connects to the very simple simplicity of Hashem Himself, was his hechel von chakike. This higher than any engraving whatsoever. Ubemele vert amitis inyan hiluch, and therefore this brings about the true hiluch, the true going on a much greater level, on keinag bolis, without any limitations whatsoever. Ukemaimer ulo anat. And where are you going? This is the true aliche. Dafke in on is amitis inyan hiluch. This is the real level of hiluch where a yid connects to the very essence of Hashem Himself, specifically through his aveda of doing mitzvahs here physically in this world. Und durch dem, was es wird sein, der Bechukosei Telechu. And through a person experiencing this beginning with the Bechukosei Telechu, which is the Hiloch mitzad Bechinas Chakike, that a person is able to go out of his limitations because of this level of Chakike, which is Sheinish HaNeshama, by drawing down the source of his Neshama, Bedugmis Esarusa de Leila, which is similar to an awakening that comes from above. Same thing here, he's drawing from the source of his Neshama from above. But then bringing along here also, fulfilling the mitzvahs, which is the Aveda, B'kiyama mitzvahs, B'chinas on, Isarusa de Lesata. That's the Aveda that a person does physically here in this world, the awakening from below. That Zayin, both of these Avedas together will bring the fulfillment via his Messiah in the Parsha. As he concludes in the Parsha, in the beginning, in the Parsha where it says the brachas, V'esalachti b'seichechem, that I will walk amongst you. It uses the term V'his halachti, which means Beis b'chinas hiloch, a combination of walking in two directions. Hiloch mul maila lamata, and V'hiloch mul mata lamaila. The revelation that comes from above to below, and the revelation that there is based on the Aveda from a person from below to above. Und die beide Hiluchim wollen sein in einem, and they're both unified as one in one word, was the verstehen sie in demselben Wort v'salachti, in one word of v'salachti. Biz, and then the pasuk continues and says, "Va'oilach eschem kaimimius," and I will bring you to go upright in Eretz Yisrael. Was kaimimius meant tzvei kaimis. The Gemara also says kaimimius means two levels of height of Adam Erishin, which refers to kaimis hamashpia and kaimis hamakabel, the level that is based on the mashpia, the giver from Hashem above, and the height that comes through the receiver from the Aveda of the Yidden below. The combination of both of these together. And they both are included in one word of kaimimios. Was das ist the schar, was wird sein, for the Aveda von dem Bechukosei Telechu, ve'es mitzvosei tishmeru. This is the reward of combining both of these Avedas, of both Bechukosei Telechu, which is drawing down the source of the neshama above, and mitzvosei tishmeru, which is the Aveda that a person does from below in the mitzvahs in this world, was wird nisgala werden in the Geula Sida, which will be revealed by the upcoming Geula Bekarev Mamish speedily in our times.